Welcome to Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Meadow with you for the next 60 minutes. Multiple ways to interact with us, but we are not going to be streaming this show live. You will be able to see the full archive later today on all of our outlets associated with Giants.com. But if you are listening live, we will still be taking your phone calls throughout the course of the program. 201-939-4513. And you could send in your tweets directly to us. You could use hashtag GiantsChat. Paul is at GiantsWFAN. I am at Lance Meadow, one word, last name, MEDOW. We'll monitor that throughout the program as well. And a reminder, you can find the archive of this show on our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So the Giants, they practiced earlier today. Paul and I will give you some takeaways from that front, and then we had a few players speak to the media as well. I want to start, Paul, with the secondary because clearly it's one of the positions, right, that we talked about throughout this offseason where there are competitions across the board, especially on the depth chart given the youth movement.
Yeah.
But I think what was noticeable today is the fact that Trey Hawkins seems to be highlighted more and more as camp starts to move forward and inch close to the first preseason game where he's been lined up on the outside in addition to Deonte Banks, and there's some experimentation with Adoree Jackson in the slot. And Hawkins is an intriguing player, right? Because he's a member of this year's draft class. He's making the transition from Old Dominion. We have talked about him, obviously, within the context of the draft class, but I don't know if most of us anticipated, Paul, that he was going to get this many opportunities, really establish himself in the running for a starting job or at least a prominent role outside of special teams.
A guy who's over 6 feet tall, so he's got some size and some length, which makes him very intriguing. And I know when the Giants took him in the 6th round, they looked at him as an athletic player who had potential. Not just on special teams. They thought that, you know what? He spent a couple of years at community college before he transferred to Old Dominion during the pandemic. And then, obviously, with the pandemic, they lost some time there. And then he finally played a couple of years with the program. Only had a couple of interceptions during his 2 seasons there, so he was not a turnover machine. But a guy, because of his traits and his tools, they were very intrigued by. And I remember talking to a couple of the staffers after the draft was over. And I said, yeah, it looks like you got Owens and Hawkins, a couple of DBs who could help on special teams. And I know special teams is going to be a question mark going into training camp. And the response I got from 2 of the fellas was, not so fast. There may be some traits here. You know, maybe they're a little raw, but there may be some traits here. Don't rule out that at some point these guys actually might be able to give you some defense too. And what we're seeing the last 2 days of practice sessions here with the Giants is that Hawkins is making himself noticed. Now, he hasn't gone against some of the top flight receivers on the practice field yet. All right. I mean, Deonte Banks goes out there, they put him on Waller. man on Waller.
Welcome to the NFL.
They put him on Hodgins. They put him on Slayton. It's like, okay, kid, deep end of the pool. You're a first-round draft pick.
The swimmies are off.
You're a third-day draft pick. You don't get that. Okay, you get to be brought along slowly against the third and fourth team wide receivers. But Hawkins has been making plays these last couple of practices, and that's great because you want to be able to have confidence in any of these players to supply you with some limited snaps if they're called upon.
100%. Plus, you never know when the injury bug is going to strike at any point. I mean, remember, we were talking about guys brought in off the street, Paul, last season, who all of a sudden were thrown right into the fire. So if you could turn to a late-round pick in this year's draft class because he prepared himself accordingly during training camp, I think that bodes very well for the team as well as, obviously, for his outlook. And his length is probably the most appealing feature, given the fact that when he is going to be thrown in there, you're going to go up against wide receivers of all sizes, but if you have to go up against a guy that's 6'4", 6'5", and that length and that reach could come in handy, especially if you can get a fingertip to knock the ball away under those circumstances.
Yes, and I think the one thing we must keep in mind, folks, is that there's no contact yet. You know, they're going to put the pads on tomorrow. So we also need to just pump the brakes a little bit here, even though he is closed and he's made some nice deflections, which, again, you have to give him credit for. Those are plays that he made, but do put it in proper context. against the competition he's going. And by the way, when he's out there, I think he's had some plays where Taylor's been the quarterback, but mostly when DeVito's been the quarterback.
Yep.
So keep that in mind also. He's not going up against Daniel Jones in those passing plays. But the other thing you have to realize is that there is no physicality. And I talked about this with Tay Banks the other day too. You can work on your shadow skills and your closing skills as a DB during these sessions. But you're not being physical, because if you start knocking into guys, coach isn't going to be too happy with you right now, because
they're going to put you on the sideline. That's what
it's like, right. So, basically, you're a DB, but they're almost tying your hands behind your back, kind of.
You're limited in terms of how aggressive you can be.
Yes,
that's the best way to put it.
They're giving you maybe a wrench and maybe a couple of nails, but the rest of your toolbox is being taken away. You just don't have everything at your disposal that you may want to use because of that. And so please, again, give the kid credit, but there's a lot you have to digest here.
No, and I agree with you. Listen, I'm the first one to say there's only so much stock or substance you could put into every single
and everybody
snap
accuses me of being overly optimistic all the time, and I got to be the one to take people down here.
I'm stunned that you're the one actually playing that role. Normally, I feel I have to take on that role. I was the one. I'm the guilty party. I brought up Trey Hawkins, and you're the one going, all right, hey, calm down. Not that I'm throwing a parade, but I'm impressed. You're really moving on to other hurdles here.
Look, yeah. It's important. It's important to understand that right now, this team looks really promising. I'm not going to pull any punches. They look really promising, but they haven't had a contacted practice yet. And, they're going to be out in Detroit next week for Tuesday and Wednesday practice sessions against the Lions. That's going to be frank with you, really the first quiz for any of these rookies. It won't even be a test. The preseason games are tests. That's going to be a quiz. 2 days of quizzes against the Detroit Lions, where you actually will have physicality in full pads against somebody that you don't know.
And that you haven't repped against every single day. Because let's face it, the other thing you have to take into consideration, in a game, you're not going to necessarily be lined up with the same wide receiver, perhaps, for every single snap. It's possible, right? It doesn't play out that way. When you're in practice, you may go up against the same teammate, right, Paul? 5, 6 snaps in a row. You now all of a sudden get a better read on their tendencies.
And again,
as a player.
I don't want to spend much time being negative on this, but if Daniel Jones is throwing the ball, it may be in a different spot with different velocity, or maybe he looks off and doesn't throw it. But if Tommy DeVito's at quarterback, with all due respect to him, he's out there trying to make plays because he wants to show people that he deserves to be amongst the 53 or the practice squad guys. So you know what? He's going to take a chance. He's going to try to make a play. He's going to put that ball out there and hope his guy can help him out and make the catch. Well, that also means that the defensive back, in this case, a Hawkins, also has an increased opportunity to make his own play.
And that's why, to me, the most encouraging aspect of what you're talking about is you want to see these guys from a work ethic standpoint, Paul.
Yes.
This early on. Hawkins has been active.
He's doing everything right to this point. There's nothing more he can do to help himself.
100%. Everything the coaching staff is expecting him to do, he's going out there, he's processing it, and it's starting to slow down. Does he have other things that he's going to have to get past? 100%. But from a work ethic standpoint, you like his activity, and you like how he has been in the vicinity of the ball more often than not. It's no different than Jalen Hyatt, right? We've seen Jalen Hyatt make plays. He had a couple of deep grabs today. You're starting to see him get more and more comfortable with respect to the scheme, what the coaches want out of him. That's what you want to see out of these young guys. You're not seeing them make one play and then all of a sudden say, oh, well, the NFL is easy. Because Hawkins actually, he spoke to the media earlier today, and he was peppered with a lot of similar questions, Paul, about, is it overwhelming? You're going from Old Dominion to the NFL. That's not necessarily a popular path. And his response to all of those questions, Paul, it's not too big for him. He said, listen, I put my head down, and I know this is the boring cliche
Just
answer.
work.
I just work.
Just
period.
work.
And
What do you
then
want him to do?
let the cards fall into place. He's not showing up to the facility every day and saying, wow, this is Daniel Jones who went to Duke, and I went to Old Dominion, and he's on one end of the spectrum, and I'm on the opposite end, and he's superhuman, and I'm just a regular Joe Schmo. Football players don't think like that. As long as they're active and they have plenty of fuel in the tank, you're going to see them be able to handle their business. The men will be able to separate from the boys, of course, when we actually get into game situations, but for anybody thinking that it's overwhelming for Troy Hawkins at this point, Paul, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever with respect to that.
No, and that's another positive that we can actually accentuate. It's not too big for him. The lights are not too bright, and he is not panicking whatsoever. He's going about his business. You can't change where you went to school. You did it already. You came out of the program. That's it. That's where you went. You can't all of a sudden get here and say, oh, geez, I'm so sorry I went to a school that wasn't a Power 5 program. I wish I could have changed that. I wish I had played in front of 100,000 people at Ohio State or at Michigan. You can't do anything about it. All you can do is put your best foot forward, work as hard as you can, and listen to Coach Dable, who has gone out of his way consistently since last year and still says it today. Every player here is going to get a chance to earn their reps. He says that almost every day.
And you want to see guys specifically that were drafted earn their reps, because if they're doing it this early in training camp, Paul, what do you think you're going to get out of them when you get to the midway point of the season?
You certainly hope. You certainly hope.
Far as a few other observations go, I want to flip the script to the offensive side of the ball. I mentioned Jalen Hyatt, but the other individual that I think has stood out here or there has been Paris Campbell, Paul. There was a beautiful throw by Daniel Jones today where he threaded the needle, right? And Campbell was well defended, and it did not miss a beat. You could have not asked for better ball placement, and in terms of the speed of Campbell being in the right spot. Those plays we've seen here or there, and once again, there's only so much you could take away, and Campbell is a polished pro, but he then again has failed to stay healthy in and out of the lineup. But there is an extra dimension, my point is, that I think Campbell brings to the table if he can get through this season.
The best way I can describe it to you folks who haven't maybe been to training camp over the last how many years is that usually during the 7-on-7 and 11-on-11 team drills, by the end of the day, maybe we'd see one eye-opening catch and maybe 3 or 4 drops almost on a daily basis. To this point today, there have been 5 practices. If you counted up all the 7-on-7s and all the 11s-on-11s, after 5 days, there have been 2 drop passes. All right, so let's talk about the efficiency and the hands of these skill position players first. Number 2, every single day, there's been at least 3 or 4 or even 5. I think today I had 6 I might have had, where you opened your eyes and said, man, that was a really good catch. That was a really good throw. I can't make it any more simple than that. The production in this passing game has clearly been something to chew on right now.
And we've seen some flashes even on the defensive side of the ball, because this was from practice the other day over the weekend. But Jason Pinnock, right, he spoke with reporters today after that dazzling one-handed interception. The great line that I
His
chuckled
father's
at.
line.
Correct, yeah.
His father's
I was
line.
just going to tell that story. He was asked about whether or not, he gets overly confident in making a play, and he says that his father was his coach, right, growing up. His father was his confidant. It was his coach. So he speaks to his dad after practice the other day, and his dad saw the highlight, and his dad goes to him. He goes, all right, Jason, well, what are you going to do tomorrow for an encore?
And he said, by the way, tomorrow, which was today, was another good practice.
Correct.
No viral video type plays, though.
No, it didn't reach that standard, but it's another example of you can't get too high, you can't get too low, just like you have to operate right with this mindset during the regular season. Training camp's no different, because what happens if you start out, and we talk about some of the standout players in the highlights, first 4 days of camp, Paul, before they put the pads on, somebody could look fantastic, right? Making plays left and right. Then they put the pads on, and you're not noticing that player anymore. So if that player gets too high, they then lose perspective on this is just the early stages. You have so much more you have to get through, especially when the physicality picks up during the course of practice.
Well, again, The pads go on tomorrow. So
Even practice, too.
That's the first day we'll see a little bit of a quiz. Then later on in the week, on Friday and Saturday, they'll have pads on again. So there'll be 3 fully padded practices this week where they're going to pick things up just a bit. And now we're going to get a sense of how these DBs may want to play with the availability to use their complete toolbox. So that's going to be a test for all these receivers who have been having a really nice time during the first 5 practices. All of a sudden now, start thinking about the fact that you're going to get bumped. You're going to get held, you're going to get bumped, and you're not going to get away with skating around freely anymore. That's number 1. And then number 2, the 2 practices on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week in Detroit. That'll be like the quizzes and then the preseason the following Monday on the 11th in Detroit. That's your first test because now it's a game.
Well, and Deonte Banks is the guy, Paul, that comes to mind based on what you're talking about, right? Because
no doubt,
if he flourishes in man-to-man press coverage, you want to see that he has the ability to jam the wide receiver a little bit right at the line. Now, he had a good pass deflection on Darius Slayton today.
Outstanding deflection.
That was a really good play.
Outstanding.
But you want to see Deonte Banks, how he meshes with receivers at the line to throw them off, right, pull their route, as opposed to, listen, it's promising to break it up down the field. Wide receivers and corners, they make adjustments during the flow of a game. But you also want to see, can a young corner throw the wide receiver he's going up against off balance so that you completely disrupt his recovery in salvaging the route?
No question. And
we have yet to see that, is what I'm saying.
As I have said, I've talked to Banks about this, and he believes the best part of his game, despite the fact that he's very fast and has length, and has shadow skills, he believes the best part of his game is the fact that he can be very physical with people. And right now, he's not allowed to do that. And so I've seen and heard that there have been critics, either on the sideline or in the peanut gallery, saying, well, Banks has given up too many completions. Okay, folks, he's not being allowed to use his toolbox. His best assets are being kept inside the toolbox. So don't panic. And besides, he's going up against the guys we talked about before, which you're being thrown into the deep end of the pool right away. You have to expect that he's going to give up completions against those guys. Now, here's what you need to do. And this is why Dable's he said yesterday he thinks he's done a good job. Because of the quickness with his feet, he has shown the ability to change direction, and he has shown the ability to have close shadowing skills. Now, think of this. If I've got shadow skills and it's a non-contact, and I'm within a yard or two of Lance, but I know I can't touch him, that ball comes in, you're going to catch the ball. Okay? But now, if I know I can make a play on the ball, and it doesn't matter if I hit you because there is contact and we're in pads, well, I'm going to aggressively try to close and stop that pass from being completed. Or I'm going to whack you and make sure that it's a perfectly timed hit so where you don't hold on to the ball. So the folks who are down on Banks' first few practices, you got to understand the context under which he's operating under. And as long as he shows shadow skills and quick feet, which he has, the coaching staff is going to be satisfied with him. And they are.
And he'll be in the vicinity to make plays on the ball. If you have good shadow skills, that means you're not on an island and then the wide receiver is on a separate island.
Yes. Now, don't get me wrong. There have been 1 or 2 times where he's been on a great move by one of the veterans. I think Beasley had him today on a double move.
And Beasley also had a nice catch
and
today,
came back and created 4 yards of separation. All right, guess what? Cole Beasley's a hell of a route runner. And this poor kid from Maryland, is ISO'd on Beasley, and Beasley gives him one of those crafty moves, and the kid was on an island. All right, you know what? He got beat on that play.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
And Cole Beasley, a little bit different than what you see in the Big Ten on a consistent basis. He's run hundreds of routes throughout the course of his NFL career. One injury to note before we open up the phone lines.
Yes.
Brian Dable spoke to the media prior to practice and had mentioned that J.C. Ossenauer, who's the veteran center, Paul, that they brought in, free agent from the Steelers, has a tricep injury, and he's going to be out long term. No definitive timeline. Yeah, correct. So you look at the calendar. highly unlikely he is going to be in the mix for a depth position or maybe a push at the starting center position, given the fact that that's a significant injury that required him going under the knife. But is it possible that he makes the 53 and then they put him on IR after? It's possible, but then again, once again, Paul, it's a game of musical chairs. It's a numbers game because remember, you have to emphasize this. You cannot be eligible to return from injured reserve unless you go on the initial 53-man roster and then you're placed on IR. If you were put on IR any time before the initial 53, you are not eligible to return unless there was an injury settlement where they physically moved on from you and then you rejoined the team 8-9 weeks after the fact. We've seen that. That's the exception, but putting that aside, that means you're not eligible to return.
I think the other health issue that we should talk about, because we couldn't do it yesterday, there was no show, is that they've taken Sterling Shepard and Jamison Crowder off of PUP. Shepard is way ahead of schedule, and I'm shocked. Because as little as 3 weeks ago, I had asked some folks about him, and they said, look, he's on PUP right now. Don't push it. We're going to try to be conservative, bring him along slowly. They know he's already had significant injuries in his career. They don't want him to have a setback. He himself in his presser yesterday spoke about that and said, I have to be smarter. I have to not push it. I want to, but I got to remember to come out. He did not practice today after practicing yesterday.
He was on the sideline, though, watching.
Correct.
Interacting.
I was flabbergasted and thrilled for him. I think it is truly, truly a very big surprise to everyone that he came off PUP this quickly. And now, if he gets through the preseason in healthy shape and shows that he can produce, Sterling Shepard's got a good chance of being on his 53.
And remember, it's all based on the timing in which you suffer the injury. And remember, most guys for ACL injuries, this is something I don't think we bring up very often. You have to wait several weeks, Paul, till you actually go under the knife.
Swelling.
Yeah. So you don't suffer the injury in week 3, which is when Sterling Shepard had the injury against Dallas, and then all of a sudden, 5 days later, they're having surgery. You normally have to wait about a month. That's why Wan'Dale Robinson, who's still on PUP,
yes,
okay, he was injured, remember, week 10 against the Lions, but then think about how far back he was of Sterling Shepard when he had to wait about a month or so after the injury to get surgery. So it's understandable, right, that he would be a little ways away. But Sterling was a little bit more ahead of the curve. With that being said, though, to your point, still promising that we're at least getting him off the PUP list and seeing him out on the field here or there. Few reminders before we open up the phone lines at 201-939-4513. Giants Huddle Podcast, you can check that out. Search for the Giants Huddle, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or you go to giants.com/podcasts. The 2023 NFL schedule, it's officially out. Single-game tickets are on sale now. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. Visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. You can also take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app is Giants TV. It brings you original video content, game highlights, on-demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. Lance Meadow, Paul Dottino with you here, Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. In case you are tuning in through the phone or whatever it may be, we are not streaming live, but the full archive will be up later today. But we're still looking for interaction on your front, the calls as well as Twitter. Hashtag Giants Chat, and we're monitoring that throughout the show. You can send them in directly to us. He's at Giants WFAN. I'm at Lance Meadow, one word, last name, MEDOW. Let's open up those lines. Rich is in Virginia, and he gets us going here on BBKL. What's happening, Rich? What do you got for us?
Hey, good afternoon, Lance and Godfather Dottino. I got two things if you have a second.
Sure, how you doing?
All right, we cut it off at 2. If you press us for 3, that's it. So we're counting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I love you, Lance. Your humor is infectious. But
well, I'm glad you see it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, good segue, because I wanted to give you you guys and the entire staff. There's some callers, without naming any names, that tend to call in on a regular basis and are very negative. And I understand it. Look, I've seen every game since 1961. If you want to be negative, check out the 1966 year. I mean, come on, we've been through a tremendous amount of trauma. But that said, you guys handle these people with class, with professionalism, and always with good cheer. So I wanted to let you know that, because you need to know that. You do a heck of a job, because the reason we listen to you guys is because you guys are the most informed people around. You're like the beat writers on steroids. You're living in that, you're in that Quest building every day. You're having lunch with the players. Tino's been around not quite as long as me, but you do a great job. And
I appreciate that.
You need to know that.
Yeah, thank you.
And please pass it on. Second thing, I know I briefed you on this before, but I know there's probably a lot of new listeners. Bryce Ford Wheaton, I am really rooting for this guy. He has a tremendous amount of hype. Both my girls went to WVU. I've seen every one of Bryce's games. No doubt, he's one of Paul's skyscrapers. He loves the skyscrapers. I think the reason Bryce didn't get drafted is, and he unfortunately typifies a lot of the WVU wide receivers, especially since David Sills left and the quarterback Will Greer left, is he has a tremendous inconsistencies on catching the ball. And that's the thing. If you remember last year, first game against Pitt, he did a curl route on the outside, and they were playing really, really well at Pitt. The ball went right through his hands. DB caught it, pick six, and they lost the game. And I'm not saying Bryce is the reason they lost the game, but my point is, I think that's why he wasn't drafted. But the Giants saw something in this kid, God bless him, and they gave him $200,000. I'm rooting for him big time. I just don't know with the numbers, and now with Shep and Crowder coming back, I just don't know. Now, you guys, Paul has been out there on the field. Can you give us some feedback on how he's doing, please?
All right, Rich, and we'll let you go on that note. Appreciate the phone call.
Talking about a player who runs sub 4.4 in the 40 and is, give or take 6'4", 6'5". Okay, he's got length. He's obviously got the speed. To me, I think there's a lot of upside there. And he has certainly fit in with all of the other professional wide receivers who have very long and deep resumes. That bodes well for him. The problem becomes if they keep 6, and I think they'll keep 6. I don't think 7. I think that's really a squeeze.
Yeah, that may be tough, especially the dynamics of the rest of the roster. Remember,
Okay.
you keep 7 wide receivers, that's less elsewhere.
Okay. So you've got Campbell and Hodgins and Slayton. I think Beasley's going to make it.
And you didn't mention
Hyatt and Shepard. Right?
And we haven't even named, some of the other guys.
Is that everybody? That's 6 now, right
I believe
there?
you named 6, yeah.
Okay. Did I mention Shepard twice? No.
No, you mentioned Shepard. Yeah.
Okay, so
Shepard
6.
was in that mix.
That's 6.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Unless there's an injury somewhere along the lines, I find it very hard to keep him. Now, what can you hope for if you're him? If he continues to show well, because they're not cutting until the final week after the preseason ends, there's only one cut this year. You go from 90 to 53. There are no longer 2 cuts or 3 cuts. There's
no
one
intermediate
cut.
ones. Yeah.
Because of that, okay, that means after that third preseason game, there are going to be a ton of players
Hundreds.
looking for a job all at once. It will be hard for other teams to look at a guy cut at that point and say, we want to put you on our 53, guarantee you a spot on our 53, because you have to do that if you pick up a waiver player. You got to guarantee him a spot on your 53 without having had him in camp for even a day. And now opening day is a week away. That's hard to do. That's risky. So I think that the new cut schedule may make it easier for teams to get guys onto their practice squad.
I would agree
because
with you.
teams might be a little more hesitant to pick up somebody else's cuts, given that situation. And if you're a guy like Ford Wheaton, you know what? You're going to say, hey, Giants, thanks for giving me the chance to come into camp. I'm comfortable here. I know your coaches. I know the players. I'd love to be on the practice squad because maybe there'll be a chance during the season that I'll get elevated. I'm sure that while he'd love to go somewhere else and be on the 53, at the same time in his mind, he's going to say, if I go somewhere else, I'm basically starting back at square one again.
You already know the scheme and the system here.
He's got a better chance of making something out of himself by rolling the dice on the practice squad and maybe getting elevated at some point if he just stays home. So that's my big picture on any guy who could be on the bubble. Ford Wheaton just happens to fall into that category for me.
I also would not read so much into the financials connected to the contract to bring him in, because I think that perhaps is an indication there was competition. There were other teams that wanted him.
Without a
You
doubt.
needed to cough up. But also the advantage of, and this goes into what you were saying, Paul, you get a better idea of the player by having him in camp and during the spring, in the classroom, so that you can better evaluate whether or not you even want somebody like that on your practice squad. Because you see, there's something raw to work with. And if we bring him back, we know that down the road, if we had somebody get hurt, we'd have no hesitation calling him up. And I do think what you pointed out with respect to a lot of cuts happening simultaneously, and that also could mean that a lot of proven veterans are within that mix. So if you're a team in the pro personnel department and a veteran who you never expected becomes available, you probably are more likely to claim that one than take a flyer on somebody that is a bit of an unknown commodity.
Especially if someone on your staff might have a connection to that veteran.
100%. Sure.
You're not going to take a flyer on somebody else's rookie.
Exactly. So it actually, now we have to see the first time we go through this process, right? We haven't seen this before. On the surface, it seems maybe that bodes well for young guys going unclaimed. Now, but it could be the complete opposite.
What doesn't bode well is that because the Giants did give him a reported guarantee of over $200,000 as a practice squad player, it shows that they know other teams wanted him.
Yep.
So he is on other people's radar. There is an absolute awareness of what he could do, and the Giants felt they had to step up to bring him in here. So I do think if he were to be waived, he's going to draw interest, but would some team, given the circumstances that we just laid out, be willing to pull the trigger?
I want to throw out one other thing you got me thinking. I don't know if he'd be happy about this, but if you're the Giants, do you contemplate how much you play him in the preseason? Because of that thinking. Where, think about it, the more you put him out on film,
I know.
All it takes, Paul, is one team.
I know.
To be impressed.
I know.
The reason I'm bringing this up is I'm sure, in addition to the last caller, there's a lot of people that are anxious to see him. That could influence how much the Giants expose him to a preseason game. It's possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you at least need to take that into consideration, especially if you don't think he may get into the top 6, which right now I think is a bit of a stretch considering the sample size is non-existent, and you're looking to preserve him. They may have to think about how much they put him out there with respect to the preseason. All right, let's head back to the phone lines. Walter is in Nebraska joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Walter? What do you got for us?
What's going on, Lance and Paulie Dots?
Hi.
Hey, I haven't had a chance to weigh in since the Barkley deal. I'm just going to, just kind of rough shot. I don't want to take too much time, but I wanted to kind of get to a couple different points. First off, I want to shout out Pierce, the new set you guys are now into the 21st century. We appreciate it. And yes.
We graduated, yes.
Yes. And then, of course, also another shout out to, I apologize, name escapes me now. Damn.
Well, it's that memorable, apparently.
No. Smell. Just wanted to shout out.
Well,
Smell
that's what I'm saying.
that.
He's that memorable. We would all agree. Yes.
Well, I know you, of course, were loving that, as much as you guys go back and forth. So I know you love the fact that his name escaped me for a second.
Escaped you? It completely disappeared. That's not escaping. Well, what are you stretching to try to find a compliment, it seems?
Pearson, how
Yes.
much did he pay you to get on the call today? That's what I want to know.
That's not the case. In any regards, I do want to give him Smoke a shout out. All of the content. It's just been, like I said, the off season is a dead spot, And I don't know if this year in particular just seems like there's just been way more content for us to kind of stay in tune, so I appreciate that. As far as Joe Shane, I'm loving the new direction. I just feel like you know, like he said, you know, like he has a price for things and he's just not willing to budge. And I just think with this organization, like, you know, in the years past, we've been way too liberal with some of the things, and I appreciate it. Now, you know, I don't know, like, if he, you know, may get a little less rigid in the future with certain particular types of players and stuff like that. That's fair. But to start where we were, where Gettleman left us with the cap and everything, it's just refreshing, and I appreciate it. To me, if nothing, if this season just tanks and it's a bad season, like I can see the justification in all the moves and everything, and it's just happy, and I'm excited about that. As far as Barkley, I know it's unfair. However, I think it's also fair. You know, I can recall one of the shows, Lance, where you were kind of expressing that, you know, even in his some of his injury seasons, you know, he still played about 10 games or the majority of the games. However, it seems like just the impact of his 5 years, it doesn't seem. And like I said, you know, and again, we're not counting anyone's money, and we're not saying they need to earn anything. However, you just have to find a way to justify it, and again, the thinking of just the market of the position of the running back and the contact. It's fair. It doesn't seem fair to Barkley, but if it's across the board, to me, it's fair. And I think, you know, I'm glad he's at camp, and I know he's unhappy about it, but I think that's just it is what it is. Dable, man, and I just have my predictions. I think 13-4. Like, I know that may seem high, but I'm looking at a lot of these games, and I'm thinking that coaching is going to give us the edge in, you know, more than half of these games. And I'm excited about that part of it, and I don't think people are really putting that much more stock in it. If 13 doesn't happen, you know, that's fine. That's good. I think the season is still going to be a success. We added a whole bunch of stuff. And then my last thing, and I'll take this off air, Beasley. I'm a fan of just the namesake, just because it's a veteran presence, and you know, he's just been around the league, and I just think that also with Kafka and Daves, I think that they could put Beasley in a situation, even if we're thinking like maybe he has lost a step or something. I'm just like, what are you guys' possibilities of thinking that Beasley will make the team?
All right, and we'll answer that off the air. You got it, Walter. Appreciate the phone call.
You know, really simply put, I think if Beasley makes it through the preseason healthy, from everything that I've seen to this point, there's no reason why he won't be on the 53. I would be shocked. And I wouldn't have said that when all of a sudden his name popped up as the Giants were signing him. I'm like, whoa, look at that. After what I've seen at practice, everybody says around the building how smart he is, how crafty he is, how much of a leader he is, how much he helps teach. Hodgson's talked about that today.
Yep.
And how valuable he is as a teacher. And quite frankly, I'm not going to pull punches here, despite everything we said to you before about the DBs not being able to contact these receivers. A, he catches everything, and B, all of his routes are short to medium range, and he knows how to run them. He is so precise. All he had to do, folks, is remember the 7 years when he was with the Cowboys and used to just stab the Giants in the kidneys
Yardage after the catch.
Every single Sunday that they played. No, this guy, he was such a pain in the rear end. What a nasty mosquito he was when he was in that Dallas silver and dark blue. So, yeah, I think he's going to make the team if he's healthy.
Well, with Wan'Dale Robinson still on PUP, I think that bodes well for him.
No doubt.
Because he's perfect for that position. The fact that Shepard has made progress, I don't know how much that impacts Beasley because, once again, they're taking it still very slow with Sterling Shepard,
They are.
even though he is off PUP. I mean, those, to me, are his two biggest competitors, Paul, right? I mean, I don't think Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slade, and I'll even throw Paris Campbell and Jalen Hyatt, I don't think if you're the coaching staff, you're having a debate about those four versus Cole Beasley. To me,
Well, they're different players.
Correct. So that's what I'm saying. If you're going to analyze what the caller asked, the chances of him making the roster, it's Beasley versus Shepard/Robinson. That's the conversation. But in order to get a solution to that question, an answer, you need to know what the status is health-wise of those other two guys. And the fact that Wan'Dale Robinson is not eligible to participate in practice, okay, well, Beasley is halfway towards the 53-man roster, at least as it stands right now.
Think about the receivers we have not talked about. Colin Johnson has had another good camp.
Sure, but he doesn't get in the conversation
He
versus
does not.
Beasley. Yes.
Jamison Crowder does.
He does. I'll give you that. Yep.
Okay, now he just came off PUP yesterday also.
Yep.
And he's accomplished and has some special teams experience.
And Beasley does too, hasn't done it though in a while.
Much less.
Yes.
Jeff Smith from the Jets was signed as a free agent. We thought primarily because of his speed and his potential on special teams. Jaden Mickens, another guy of smaller, diminutive stature who has caught the ball quite well during training camp.
And another special teamer as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Folks, I know it's not an all-pro receiving core top to bottom, but there's enough guys to fill up 2 rooms.
We also didn't even bring up David Sills.
No.
Who's been here forever.
Didn't even bring up David
Now, he's
Sills.
once again not a Beasley-esque receiver, but still, there's a few guys that we have not maybe noticed necessarily during the course of practice, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a realistic shot to get in. So as far as Beasley is concerned right now, to get back to the question, right now it looks good, but let's see when Wan'Dale Robinson, if he does come off of PUP during the course of training camp, because here's the other thing that is important to note with respect to Wan'Dale Robinson. If he does not come off of PUP during training camp, Paul, he's eligible to go to regular season PUP.
Correct.
So that means that you don't have to worry about making a 53-man roster decision. He just transfers over to PUP.
6 games, though.
And then, correct, he'll be eligible a little ways in. No, but my point is that buys Beasley more time.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Or anybody else.
Or
for that
anybody
matter.
else. But I'm using Beasley as a comparison because that's who the caller was referencing. So you don't have to worry about how does Robinson fit into the equation. Shepard, though, he already came off of PUP. You cannot put Sterling back
Correct.
on PUP.
That's
so
it.
Sterling's option is he either goes to the 53-man roster or he goes to season-ending injured reserve or you wind up parting ways with him. So you don't have that luxury compared to Wan'Dale Robinson, or I should say anybody else that technically is on PUP. See, there's all of these different labels with the rules and regulations in camp, and they're different. They're not necessarily falling under the same umbrella.
That's why Shepard's recovery, as dramatic as it's been and as accelerated as it's been, is so significant because they never would have taken the PUP off of him unless they fully believed that he had an opportunity to go out there and do something.
Sure.
There was no reason to, especially how conservative the Giants usually are with these things.
Well, and also from a mathematical equation standpoint, if you are 50-50 on whether or not a player is going to be eligible for the start of the regular season, there's no incentive to take them
No.
off of PUP.
No.
Because worst case scenarios you mentioned, Paul, you put them on regular season PUP, they're there, you work on the rehab process, and then 6-7 weeks into the season comes by, then you can have a new conversation. And here's the other benefit. Once you get 6 or 7 weeks into the regular season, who knows what the current shape of your roster is, Paul? Not that you wish an injury to happen, but let's say a wide receiver goes down. You may now say, okay, well, this week, this wide receiver is eligible to come off of PUP, and it's a natural transition to make the roster move where you bring player A off of PUP and then you put the other player on IR or whatever you have to do to make the corresponding transaction. So that's the other thing that I think says an awful lot about your point about Sterling Shepard. You're not taking him off of PUP if you don't think the start of the regular season is within striking distance.
And that's why at this point I'm leaning towards he's going to make it. As long as he's healthy, I suspect he's going to make it.
And the other thing with respect to the numbers game is Paris Campbell, even though he's capable of playing in the slot, he's more of a speedster. He's a vertical guy. Beasley, Shepard, and Wan'Dale Robinson are going to operate more so within shorter range and then get their yardage after the catch. So that's why I still say the conversation centers around that trio when it comes to determining who's going to make the roster if you're trying to decipher what the percentages are or the chances are. But Beasley, we were talking about this earlier, made a catch today where he's able to get open. It doesn't matter how old he is. It doesn't matter how many years he's been in the league. He's not the type of player that revolves around and relies on blowing past personnel, right? He's crafty where he can still find ways at his age, my point is, to get open.
He frustrates the living hell out of defensive backs because, you understand, he's in the league 12 years. He's 34 years old. He actually retired at one point last year. And you're like,
yeah, he was with the Bucks, remember, before the Bills.
Yes, and you're like, okay, yeah, he's not going to do that to me. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're caught with your pants down. He's got a 12-yard catch for a first down. I mean, he's that kind of guy, like the knuckleball pitcher who drives the batter crazy.
Tim Wakefield, is that
right? Try to hit him because
sure.
well, I was thinking Wilbur Wood. But
okay,
that's all right.
Wakefield was known for that. For
yes,
the Red
he
Sox,
was.
yes. Depends on how old our audience is.
This is true.
Yes.
But
Equal
the bottom line is that's the kind of guy who just makes defensive backs frustrated beyond belief. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. Getting a defensive back's head like that, and you get them all bent out of shape and ticked off because, look, I should be able to stop this guy. And then he burns you once, twice. All of a sudden, he's burned you 4 times and beat you.
Well, and that's why when you see players on the sideline, they don't look as if they have blazing speed, but it's still impressive how they find ways to get open, isn't it?
Beasley's one of those guys who just always was able to do it.
I'm not saying they're identical, but this conversation has me thinking back to Jake Ballard. Comes to mind. How many times do you watch Jake Ballard run a route? He's not a speedster, but the man found ways to get open.
Well,
right?
he's a tight end.
I know it's a different position, but even tight ends. There are some tight ends that can blow right past the opposition.
I really hate to do this. Oh, my goodness. I might get struck with lightning for this.
Oh, I'm all for
Beasley's cut out of the cloth of a Steve Largent. Okay? Steve Largent, when he was with the Seahawks, who was in the Hall of Fame as one of the greatest receivers who's ever played, he's cut out of his cloth in that doesn't have blazing speed, doesn't have great size, doesn't have great length, but you know what? An incredible route runner who knows what he's doing, will set you up and find ways to use his craftiness to catch passes and find ways to win. That's what he did. Now, again, not the same player, not the same category, but a similar philosophical way to beat you.
I'm thinking, I thought you were going to go maybe the route of some of those Patriots slot guys.
Fine.
And that's what he reminds me more of, doesn't he?
Edelman.
Correct. Or Danny
Or
Amendola.
Amendola. Sure.
One of those players.
Hell, Cooper Kupp does that too. He's not the fastest guy in the league.
Sure, but Kupp has a little bit more
But
explosion,
he does have more speed.
There's
He does have more
explosion to
speed.
Cooper Kupp. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily put Beasley in that category, but he reminds me, he's the typical Bill Belichick wide receiver who is going to run very well-disciplined routes, is going to find ways to get open within the scheme, and he's going to help you move the chains. And those are the polished veterans. There's room for a guy like that on every single roster in the NFL. And when you look also, by the way, at Cole Beasley's career, and this is something that I don't think gets discussed much, durability has really never been a question with respect to Cole Beasley. You were talking about his days with the Dallas Cowboys. I'm bringing up his game log here. I mean, you go down the list, and I'm not even considering last season because, remember, he was retired. But from 2014 all the way through 2021, 15, 16 games. That's all you see every single season. Now, I'm not trying to jinx anybody. Okay, well, knock on wood or whatever this table is made of. I don't know. I wasn't here when they put it together. But the bottom line is that has been more than a pencil. That has been a guy you pen in, and you know he's 100% reliable.
I know.
And I didn't think we were going
Again, we're not talking same caliber, but this is the style or the way that these crafty guys beat you. That's just the way it is. And they make defensive players go nuts.
And when you look ahead to the regular season with respect to analyzing the wide receiver position, that's why maybe the way we're talking about the receiving core this year in comparison to previous years is different, because I don't remember having as much versatility and depth within the conversation, Paul, compared to what we're looking at this year. And so when the Giants, they ultimately do finalize the 53-man roster, and you could see the various different lineups that they're going to showcase, you're going to have the opportunity to put a tall wide receiver out there with Darren Waller and Bellinger. If you have two tight ends, you can go the shorter direction with respect to the slot wide receivers, who you're going to have a variety of, and then the speedsters in Darius Slayton and Paris Campbell. So the Giants receiving core, regardless of who's out on the field, is going to offer the defenses something to think about no matter where these players are lined up.
It's another kaleidoscope on offense as opposed to defense. I talk about it, Wake Martindale's kaleidoscope defense. We're going to see a kaleidoscope offense with skill position players mixing and matching on a consistent basis.
One other thing I want to throw out before we wrap up that we did not touch on, we mentioned the injury to J.C. Hassenauer. There's jobs up for grabs, Paul, on the offensive line, whether it be center, whether it be left guard. They're mixing and matching a lot, and this shouldn't surprise anybody. When Brian Daboll spoke, I think it was late last week, he was asked about Bredesen and John Michael Schmitz rotating at center, and he says, that's the plan. We're going to have different guys with the ones throughout the course of training camp, but we're even seeing Tyree Phillips in the mix on the interior, which we were having conversations about him more as being the swing tackle. The bottom line is they're not holding back in terms of seeing these combinations, and players who may have played primarily tackle last season could very well be in the mix or candidates in their mind to squeeze into the guard spot this season.
Yeah, it could happen. Shane Lemieux has taken a number of reps at center.
Yep.
And now with Hassenauer out, Lemieux, in my mind, becomes the third-string center at the moment behind John Michael Schmitz, Bredesen, and Lemieux.
Yeah, it's those three.
And look, again, I don't know what Lemieux's health is going to be in a month, but if his health holds up and he proves that he can be a swing guy on the interior, it's going to help his chances.
The thing to note also about Lemieux is, even though he was always a guard at Oregon, he had that 50-plus game streak where he did not miss a contest. When he was drafted, it was indicated that Lemieux did get snaps in practice at center.
Yes.
So it's not as if he hasn't been exposed. He just has not been exposed within a game. But they had prepped him, God forbid, at Oregon. They suffered an injury that they can move him over. And he's been anxious, to your point, Paul, to be thrown into that position. Because I think Shane Lemieux, like any player, right? You're here now multiple years. It's a new regime. The general manager who is running things did not draft you. You're in your mind, you got to be thinking, how do I maximize the opportunity to make this roster? And if I don't get slid automatically into guard, well, why don't I go to the coaching staff and say, guys, I'm more than willing and open to play center. That's how you carve out a roster spot if they can use you in a variety of different ways.
Look, we talked about Lemieux when he was drafted as a potential guy in the center mix. And then because of injuries, his first few years in the league, we kind of left him out of the conversation. But really, when you think about it now, that he's competing at the both guard spots and the center spot, this is kind of where he was as a rookie. It's kind of back to the future for him all over again.
100%. And it was Mario Cristobal, who's now the head coach at Miami, who was Lemieux's coach at Oregon. I remember we had a conversation on the Giants Huddle podcast, and the question was posed, how much did you utilize him at center? And he said it was a daily routine at practice. We'd always have emergency plans. God forbid a game plays out, and you need to play the game of musical chairs, as I like to call it, up front in the trenches. All right, that is going to wrap up Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. And once again, due to the technical issues, we know the show was not streamed live, but it will be up in the archives on Giants.com, YouTube, and so forth later today. So anything you missed, you can check back in, and we'll have Big Blue Kickoff Live up and running, hopefully live. I use the key term, hopefully. Depends on if Pearson, who the other caller wanted to give credit to earlier, who is doing a tremendous job building our studio. He is also in charge of every technical aspect of this show as we throw certain staff members under the bus here to wrap things up. Exactly. Okay, there you go. Thank you for confirming. It is indeed wood. I should have went with my gut with respect to that. With that being said, for Paul DeTito, I'm Lance Meadow. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Today's episode is part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. We will speak to you on Tuesday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.